She was a bright and cheerful third grader who loved to sing and dance. She had a happy family and a promising future. But one day, she vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that haunted her community for decades. Who kidnapped, raped, and killed Debbie Lynn Randall? And how did the police finally solve the case after 50 years? This is the story of one of the most twisted and tragic crimes in Georgia history. Debbie Lynn Randall was born on October 16, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia. She was the youngest of 3 children of John and Juanita Randall, a hardworking and devout couple who moved to Georgia from Alabama. Debbie Lynn was a friendly and outgoing girl who enjoyed playing with her siblings and friends, riding her bike, and going to church. She was a good student at Pine Forest Elementary School, where she excelled in reading and math. She also had a passion for music and dancing and dreamed of becoming a singer or a dancer when she grew up. On January 13, 1972, Debbie Lynn left her home at the Crestview Apartments around 3:30 p.m. to go to a nearby laundromat where her mother had left some clothes for her to pick up. She was wearing a blue coat, a red dress, white tights, and black patent leather shoes. She had a small purse with her containing a dime and a nickel. She crossed the street and entered the laundromat, where she was seen by several witnesses. She collected the clothes and put them in a plastic bag. She then left the laundromat and headed back to her home, which was less than a block away. But she never made it. She disappeared in broad daylight, in a busy area, with no signs of a struggle or a scream. When Debbie Lynn did not return home by 4 p.m., her mother became worried and called the police. The police launched a massive search for the missing girl, involving thousands of volunteers, helicopters, dogs, and divers. They canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed witnesses, checked vehicles, and followed every lead. But they found no trace of Debbie Lynn or her abductor. The case attracted national attention and media coverage, as well as the involvement of the FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. But despite all the efforts, the case went cold. On January 29, 1972, 16 days after Debbie Lynn's disappearance, a college student who was part of the volunteer search team found her body in a ditch near a wooded area, about 10 miles from her home. She was partially clothed, and her plastic bag with the clothes was nearby. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled with a piece of cloth that was tied around her neck. The cloth was later determined to be part of a curtain that matched the ones in the apartment where Debbie Lynn lived. The police also recovered a hair from the suspect, which they preserved as evidence. The autopsy revealed that Debbie Lynn had died within 24 hours of her abduction. The police had several suspects in the case, but none of them could be conclusively linked to the crime. One of them was a man who lived in the same apartment complex as Debbie Lynn and who had a history of sexual offenses. He had been seen near the laundromat on the day of the abduction, and he had a car that matched the description of a vehicle that was seen speeding away from the area. He also had a scar on his face that matched a scratch that Debbie Lynn had on her hand. However, he denied any involvement in the case, and the police could not find any physical evidence to connect him to the crime. Another suspect was a man who had been arrested for kidnapping and raping a 10-year-old girl in a nearby county, and who had confessed to killing another girl in Florida. He had a similar car to the one seen near the laundromat, and he had been in the area at the time of the abduction. However, he later recanted his confession, and the police could not find any forensic evidence to link him to the crime. A third suspect was a man who had been convicted of murdering a 12-year-old girl in Tennessee and who had escaped from prison and was on the run. He had been spotted in Georgia, and he had a car that matched the description of the one seen near the laundromat. However, he was later captured and executed, and he never admitted to killing Debbie Lynn. The case remained unsolved for 50 years until a breakthrough came in 2022, thanks to the advances in DNA and forensic technology. The police had sent the cloth and the hair that they had recovered from the crime scene to various labs for testing over the years, hoping to find a match with the suspect's DNA. In 2001, the FBI tested the hair and was able to exclude many potential suspects. In 2015, the cloth was tested and produced a partial profile of an unknown male. In 2019, the cloth was tested again and produced a more complete profile. In 2022, the police hired a private lab that specialized in genetic genealogy, which is the process of using DNA to trace a person's family tree. The lab was able to find relatives of the suspect. who agreed to cooperate with the investigation and provide their DNA samples for comparison. The police then narrowed down the list of possible suspects to one man who had not been on their radar at any point during the investigation: William B. Rose, who was 24 years old at the time of the crime. Rose had lived in the same apartment complex as Debbie Lynn, and he was related to some of her neighbors. He had a criminal record for alcohol-related offenses, but he had never been arrested for a violent crime. He had killed himself in 1974, 2 years after Debbie Lynn's murder, by shooting himself in the head. The police exhumed his body and obtained his DNA, which matched the DNA from the crime scene. The police announced that they had solved the case and identified the killer in September 2022, 50 years after Debbie Lynn's death. William B. Rose was born on June 6, 1947, in Georgia. He had a troubled childhood, as his father was abusive and his mother was mentally ill. He dropped out of school and joined the Army, but he was discharged for misconduct. He had a history of alcoholism and depression, and he had attempted suicide several times. He had been married and divorced twice, and he had a son who he rarely saw. He worked as a mechanic and a truck driver, and he moved around frequently. He had no known connection to Debbie Lynn other than living in the same apartment complex. He had never been a suspect in the case, and he had never confessed to the crime. He had taken his own life in 1974. The motive for the crime remains unknown, as Rose never explained why he abducted, raped, and killed Debbie Lynn. The police believe that it was a random and opportunistic act, as Rose saw Debbie Lynn walking alone and decided to snatch her. He may have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or he may have been driven by a twisted impulse or a mental disorder. He may have also felt guilty or afraid of being caught, which may have led him to kill himself. Since Rose was dead, there was no trial or conviction for the crime. However, the police and the district attorney declared that the case was closed and that justice was served. They said that Rose had to answer to a higher power for his actions, and that they hoped that the identification of the killer would bring some closure and peace to Debbie Lynn's family and friends, who had suffered for so long. They also praised the efforts and persistence of the investigators, who never gave up on the case, and the advances and innovations of the forensic science, which made the breakthrough possible. The case of Debbie Lynn Randall is a heartbreaking and horrifying story of a young girl who was robbed of her life by a cruel and cowardly killer. It is also a story of a long and frustrating search for the truth, which spanned 5 decades and involved countless people and resources. It is a story that shows the power and the limitations of the law and the science, and the challenges and the rewards of solving a cold case. It is a story that reminds us of the importance of protecting and cherishing our children, and of never losing hope or giving up on justice. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to get notified of our new uploads.